Hi everyone, hope you're audible and welcome to today's LinkedIn live webinar, Decoding Hull Fouling Factors, Impacts and Prevention Strategies. I'm Ashla Anil and the Global Sales Manager at Oceanix. I'm thrilled to be your moderator today for this interactive and informative section. Before we dive in, I would like to remind everybody this is a live section and it will be recorded. So please feel free to ask your questions, your concerns during the chat, during the presentation, and just put that inside the chat box. So we'll be answering them by the end of the section in our Q&A section. Hope you guys have a very insightful and a very informative section. So now let's begin our webinar by inviting our esteemed speakers. So first, I would like to invite Mr. Prister. He's a global R&D director of hull protection at Jotun Performance Coating. So I would like to add him to the stage. Hi, Krista.
Hello.
And yeah, so he's been working in Jotun for the past 14 years across the range of the industries. For the last 5 years, he's working as a global R&D director, following protection with the responsibility of large multidisciplinary teams across the early stage technology development, product development, and commercial support and maintenance. So he also holds a various roles in a various academic institution. I believe he's one of the top expertise in the industry. Welcome, Kristen. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that introduction. So I will try to share my screen so that you can also see. Let's see, I will just do. Hopefully you are able to see something.
Krista, could we just present the presentation after we have an introduction of all the
Sure.
guests? Sure.
Sure.
That's great. Yeah. So next, I would like to invite Mr. Jeet Banerjee. Jeet is right now he's working as the Emissions Data Management Services or the EDM. He's working there. Has He's been greatly skilled in the area of MRV, DCS, UETS compliance. He's heading over there, and right now he's working with the Columbia Shipmanagement that caters every aspect of the emission trading, ensuring that the accurate and compliant submissions and providing his expert guidance to the team at Columbia Shipmanagement. Hi, Jeet.
Thank you for the intro, Ashila. Hi, Christo. Looking forward to our presentations today. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Next, I would like to welcome our third speaker. He's Captain Nish. He is the Vice President of Nautical Institute and is also an IMO Goodwill Maritime Ambassador. And Captain Nish is in this industry. He's been talking about the marine operations, safety, regulation side of the things. And Nish is a vice president president of the Nautical Institute UK, and he's a vice chairman of the Sri Lanka branch, which also he brings a great seasoned capabilities during his captain journey and the voyaging that he's having right now with him. He's also recognized as the Goodwill Ambassador by the IMO, like I mentioned. He also holds an LLB honors degree, and he's also attorney by profession also. He's all over the place in the maritime space. Welcome, Nish.
Thank you, Ashila. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you for asking me to join this fruitful and wonderful webinar. Thank you so much, and looking forward to. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And next we have our CEO, Mr. Sandith Thandasherry. He's the backbone of Oceanix and Naval Group. I welcome you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashla. Hi, Krista, Jeet, and Nish. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a brief introduction about everybody. Let's move on to the presentation one by one, and I think Sandith will be setting a stage for it by presenting on and by introducing about the framework of hull performance. So over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. You can see the screen? Yeah, everyone? Yeah, okay. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you have joined from. And before we go into listening to the expert speakers, I would like to give a framework of understanding and defining hull performance. So that will help the audience put these things in context. So let's start by defining a purpose of a vessel. So usually it is to move cargo or people from one place to another. And this means that your input is the fuel and your output is the speed. Now, if you have means of measuring the intermediate steps, then we can obviously separate out these efficiencies. So, for example, if you had means of measuring the uh, engine power outputs, then we can separate out the engine efficiency, which is normally the case now. If you have a thrust meter, which is very unusual, we can separate propeller and hull. So since it's not normal, usually when we talk hull performance, it implies you're talking of hull and propeller performance, which means the engine power is the input and the speed is the output. Now, here there are a few factors to consider when we talk of engine power and speed output. One is like the vessel condition, what we say is usually the cargo weight or draft. Then there is weather condition, which is whether wind, wave, etc., and other conditions like water temperature, rudder, shallow water, etc. Now, the key in hull performance is the ability to separate out the effects of all these and then isolate the hull condition or hull fouling so that we can take many decisions and insights. Now, when we talk hull performance, there are two types. One, we are talking about absolute performance. This is more like a prediction model where we are trying to estimate a parameter like power or fuel in terms of the combination of speed, draft, weather, etc. Now, one needs such an analysis to guarantee a consumption of the vessel. The importance of this and accuracy of this is to the fact that, like, for example, if you overestimate the prediction, then there is less likely that the ship can get a charter. But if you underestimate a prediction, then you may end up paying penalty under the charter party contract. So there are many ways to do this. Machine learning is one. Then there are multivariable regression is another. But our understanding is that the physics-based algorithms are better than pure algorithms. Now, the second type is all about change in performance. And that is like you're trying to understand the percentage change rather than the absolute value. And today's session is all about change. And there are many ways to compute this hull performance. And ISO 1930 has emerged as the most powerful tool. And this seems to be the most logical way for computing change. Now, when we talk of hull plus propeller performance, we have discussed speed and power. So now we usually refer to the speed power curves. Now we can use the basis as sea trials, which is a clean hull condition, and then refer to compare with the rough hull conditions. So when we talk of change, there are two ways to look at it. Either we fix the speed, which in this case, let's take the example of 16 knots is the speed, and you are looking at increase in power from 9,000 to 10,000. That's one way to represent change. The other way is you can fix the power, which in this case 9,000, and plot a speed reduction from 16 to 15. So it's like a speed loss. So ISO is all talking about speed loss as a methodology, and that's the way it is done. Now, when we are talking change, we always have two periods. So these periods could be 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, depending on what we are trying to do. This are, when we say performance indicator, you always refer to speed loss and speed loss compared to sea trials. That's in clean hull is a reference point always. So when we take a reference period, which is on, say, on the left side, indicates a reference period, and evaluation period on the right side. So we're trying to understand the change between the two. The important insight is the further away from the sea trial, which here is usually referred as 0%, it is bad, which means consumption has increased. You're moving away from sea trial. That's the important insight. Now, to calculate each point represents a data point or 1 day of operation. So to calculate each point, you first start off with what condition you are. It might be somewhere between ballast and loaded, and you are trying to see what was the performance in sea trial condition, clean hull condition, and what is it today after removing all the effects of weather and other various factors as per ISO. Wave is not typically prescribed in ISO, but the way to remove the wave is you take only the calm condition like sea state 4 and below. So that's the way to do that. And then you try to find the change in speed, which is speed loss for the same power. And that is represented as 1 point in this. Now, using this approach, there are multiple ways of getting insights. There are 4 insights you can get. The first type is all about maintenance effect, where we are trying to understand a change before and after an event. So here we try to see, in this case, it is 16.25 has become 13. So there is what you call as going closer to 0%. So it's like, which is why the indicator is 2.61. So it's positive green 2.61. So this is some event has happened. Your speed loss have reduced, which means your fuel consumption has decreased. So this is one way to indicate. Or in terms of fuel, you can say, okay, there is a 5.8% savings in fuel, which is about 8 tons. So usually ship owners understand fuel, and hence it's useful always to compute that fuel and put that number. But that specifies a particular condition of speed and draft. The beauty of speed loss is it is agnostic to the condition, whereas when you talk of fuel and power, you almost always have to specify a condition. Now, apart from, once we get this speed loss or fuel saving, since it's a maintenance event, we like to then understand the ROI, return on investment. So this is usually a case, especially for energy saving device. But important to note that here the example is a dry dock. You almost always have to remove the effect of dry dock before isolating the effect of the energy saving device. That's given. So let's take this 5.8% as a fuel saving. And if you know the 1 year fuel consumption post the event, then you can compute the fuel saving for the first year after dry dock. And then using the fuel price, you can find an annual saving. And if you know the capex of the investment of the energy saving device, you do ideally a net present value financial model, if not a simple return on investment model, depending on how complex people want to do. And then you can take an economic decision of doing an energy saving device. While before and after is interesting, when it comes to dry dock, you are doing a dry dock not by a choice. You also have to meet certain regulatory obligation. So which means to understand the efficacy of dry dock, you tend to compare with the previous one. So there is a dry dock performance you can compare with previous one and see the first 1 year post the event. Now, there could be, in this case, for example, you see a slight improvement in performance. Typically, you should expect the opposite because there are a lot of irreversible changes happening in the hull due to deformation, etc. So in this case, there is an improvement, which is unusual good. It could be because of better paint, better surface preparation, etc. This can be quantified in fuel as well, like before. So you know that you're improved by 1.7 tons per day. The third kind, which is important for coating and where all coating contracts are made, is the in-service performance. Here, post the event, post the dry dock, you're taking the first year versus the remaining period and comparing the speed loss change. So here it shows an example where the change is 2.28%. So it has gone away. But the important thing is, what is the paint guarantee? A high quality paint may guarantee about 1 to 2% change over a 5-year period. A moderate one, maybe 3-4%, and a very normal grade is about 7%. So depending on the paint, expected change in performance is there and what is actual. So here the expected for this period is 2.28. You have a 2.55, which means it's slightly more than what is expected. And it means there is some intervention needed to maintain the contractual obligation. And this can be translated in fuel as well for ship owners to understand. The fourth type is the maintenance trigger, which is to take a decision on whether to do an intervention or not. You need to understand the first 3, 6, 9 months versus the latest 3, 6, 12 months. And therefore, you can see whether the change is more than what is anticipated. If yes, then you may want to do a hull cleaning, propeller cleaning, etc., to catch up with this change. So this is how the maintenance trigger is used. So there are these four types of analysis. This is in the fuel as well. Apart from that, obviously one can do a custom analysis in terms of changing the period or the length or timing of the period, and then gain insights. But most important is not just to compute the number. These numbers have to then analyzed to understand why this has happened, and these has to be put in a detailed reports for performance analysis. And this is usually done by most of the ship owners as well as leading coating companies like Jotun, and therefore you get these kind of reports for the clients to make an assessment. So this is, I hope this lays down the framework for the hull performance, and I look forward to listen to three of our experts on the various topics before we go into Q&A at the later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandith sir. That was very insightful, and thanks for laying the framework. So next we have Krista. He'll be sharing his thoughts about the importance of hull fouling. Over to you, Krista.
Thank you very much. Then I will try to get this to work. 1 second. I hope that I'm able to get it to share. Let's see. There we go. And then it should be. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes, it's visible.
Perfect. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you also for laying a very good foundation in terms of the ISO 19030 and the performance measurements and so on. I will take a step back. I will not dive deeper into paints directly, but I will take an overarching perspective on sustainability from our side. I will then dive back into and explain some of the aspects of how clean hulls are an absolute key to achieving performance and to achieve the sustainability targets of the industry, and also look at it through the lens of Jotun and how we have wrapped this into our own clean shipping commitment. So starting with sustainability, of course, sustainability is not a paradox. We need to become more sustainable. We need to convert into a more sustainable way of operating our society. But we have been very unilateral in terms of our focus on implementing and introducing a lot of new things. We have been adding this consumption craze where there is a lot of focus on new things, new technologies, adding this and that and installations. But then if we actually take a step back and look at what are the consequences, what is the footprint of our actions and the activities we have, we need to continue to realize that the most sustainable thing that we can do as individuals and as industries is to consume less. It's not only about adding more, adding new things, adding new technology, but it's actually finding ways to consume less. I will give you a few examples from our experiences and our perspectives in terms of what that actually means. For example, you can look at consuming less materials. Corrosion is a major challenge to most of the industries, and it's estimated that about between 20 and 40% of all the steel which is produced every year is used to replace corroded steel. And steel production today amounts to about 9% of the global CO2 emissions. So altogether, that actually means that the cost of corrosion itself is 3.4% of the global GDP altogether. And out of that, if we were able to extend the lifetime of that steel installation or that asset and design it appropriately through better corrosion protection or fit for purpose design, we could actually reduce that corrosion loss with up to 1/3, which is a massive amount when it comes to savings, and obviously has an impact in terms of consuming less material and consuming less steel to replace it. Another perspective, which is very relevant to the maritime industry, is of course to consume less energy. And that is then reflecting back on that the shipping industry amounts for about 3% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And as we have seen, and as we will also see in the following presentation, it is increasingly regulated. And there are clear aims in terms of decarbonization and energy transition within this industry. But the only way to achieve this in a sustainable manner is again to minimize the energy consumption and assuring that the vessels operating are operating at their most efficient way. In Jotun, we have tried to fit this into a holistic approach to how we look at sustainability. Of course, when you use paint, that means also that you're consuming material, and we are focusing a lot to document and clarify and minimize the footprint of the products that we're using. But then we also put a lot of efforts into actually quantifying what is the benefit, what is the avoided emission achieved by protecting the property, longer lasting corrosion protection, more efficient vessels through cleaner hull, safer, and so on. These things have a huge impact in terms of the overall carbon footprint and also the ability of industries to decarbonize. I will get back to some also tangible numbers on this when I progress into the presentation. So going back into the hulls, because we're here to talk about shipping and we're here to talk about hulls, of course, clean hulls are an integral part of enabling the shipping industry to decarbonize and to achieve its targets. And it starts with fouling, because fouling is the reason why hulls are no longer clean. And as we know, fouling is organisms growing on the hull surface, and over time, this fouling grows from microfouling, slime, into algae, larger organisms, and also animals, which in turn increases the friction on the hull, which causes the ship to slow down. That has a consequence on the operational efficiency of that vessel. In order to compensate for that, you need to increase the power outage from the engine, which then causes fuel consumption to go up, which has a cost effect, but it also causes more emissions, which then has a direct impact on the carbon footprint and emission from that operation. So fouling and keeping that hull clean is obviously a clear and important factor in terms of enabling a minimized emission from any ship. Last year, Lloyd's List made a survey across the shipping industry where it looked into the understanding of biofouling as an effect to the industry. And based on these respondents, it clearly suggests that the industry underestimates the impact of biofouling, both on the greenhouse gas emissions, but also on the consequences in terms of invasive aquatic species. It came out that actually almost 2/3 of the shipping industry underestimates the negative environmental impacts, and also that as much as 1 in 4 of the respondents claim to know little or nothing about the issue of biofouling altogether. And that is quite surprising, and also shows that there is a big opportunity for the industry to really step up and take some easy wins to improve their abilities to decarbonize and improve their vessel and fleet performance. Because when you look at the globe fouling report from IMO in 2022, the direct consequence of biofouling is that is accounted to be responsible for about 1/5 of the total emissions from the shipping industry. And that means that if a ship was if all the ships were able to stay clean and protected from biofouling, that would enable the industry to cut CO2 emissions by as much as 19%. It's not 100, which is the target by 2050, but it's still a very important step on the way to enable the decarbonization of this industry to go into effect. So there's a massive potential here for some easy scores for a big part of the industry to achieve a better performance. In Jotun, we have been working with fouling prevention since almost 100 years. And we have, over the time, expanded from only focusing on paints and delivering paints. That is our foundation, and that is what we still see as the core of what we do. But we have enhanced that to also include data and digital services, advisory and expert support, and also disruptive innovations to allow us to enable our customers to keep the cleanest possible ships in all circumstances, to make sure that we can contribute to decarbonization and reducing the environmental impact on these operations. And then we may ask ourselves, so what about all the other technologies, all the energy saving devices, all these fantastic new things that are innovated all the time as well? Well, they matter and they have a very important role to play. But what is important to remember is that if you don't keep a clean hull as a foundation, that additional biofouling can easily cancel out all the additional benefits that you will get from an energy saving device. Even a low level of fouling on a ship can increase the friction and resistance with up to 19-20%, which is already in the range of devices such as sails or air lubrication or other different tools, which is having a very, very strong effect and looks to be introduced more widely across the world fleet. But then again, if you were on a foul ship, that would be completely a waste of the resources and the time. And then again, also when we move into new and sustainable fuels, these are scarce commodities, and having a fouled hull will increase also the unnecessary spendage of such commodities, which is not where we would like the industry to go. So in Jotun, again, what we have done is that we have wrapped our focus on sustainability and our experiences in the shipping industry and of keeping hulls clean into what we call the clean shipping commitments. And we focus on the fact that it all starts with a clean hull. That is the enabler of everything that the industry needs to start its journey towards decarbonization. We support the industry in doing this through advanced anti-foulings, data and digital services, advisory support, and disruptive innovation. And through that, we're able to provide reduced speed loss, as was discussed in the previous presentation. We can enable fuel savings, improve operational flexibility, reduce the vessel downtime, and also assure regulatory compliance, because these things help the industry to reduce carbon emissions and protect biodiversity and preserve fuels. I talked quite a lot about the carbon emissions and the effects that has, but we also need to reflect on the fact that biodiversity is an increasingly important factor for the industry to focus on. About 70% of all invasive species in water today are estimated to be transferred on vessels. So keeping a clean hull also avoids any vessels operating and functioning as a vector for new invasive aquatic species. And additional, as I mentioned, new fuel types will be more expensive, they will be more scarce. And already today, fuels are the biggest expense of the shipping industry, representing up to 50-60% of the total operational cost, which will increase when you get new fuel types. And then additional fouling will exponentially also increase that cost. So it's a very important part from that perspective of the use as well, to reduce the overall consumption of fuels from a sustainability perspective. So we have done some calculations based on the ISO 19030 method as was described, and also the data that we have gained over the last 10-15 years with operating with this standard and this methodology. Our calculations indicate that our customers in an aggregated manner have been able to reduce their emissions by about 10.4 million tons of CO2 in 2023. That's the equivalent of removing more than 2 million cars from the roads, which is also a massive contribution from the industry in terms of the ability to start decarbonizing. And this is only by doing something as simple as assuring that the hull of their vessels is clean. So in this presentation, I hope that I've been able to quickly introduce you to some of the overarching perspectives on sustainability and connect that into how important a clean hull is to enable this, and also reflect that from a Jotun perspective, where we are using the clean shipping commitment as a platform to work with our customers and the market to focus and help them on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Crystal. That was very nice, and we all know about Jotun, how you guys began everything. So that was great to know. And next, I would like to welcome Jeet. He'll be sharing his thoughts on from hull to atmosphere, how biofouling escalates emission penalties. Over to you, Jeet.
Thank you, Ashila. Just let me share my presentation. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we could.
Just
yeah, sure.
just a minute, I'm having some problem in terms of this. Is it visible now?
It is visible. Yeah, it could be great if you could make it a full screen. Jeet, I'll just
you see now?
press. Yeah, is it visible right now?
Yeah. Okay. Okay, to start with, thank you, Ashila, for providing the platform to speak about biofouling as a whole. It's a very pressing factor when it comes to the emission penalties. Biofouling as a factor, obviously it impacts on the vessel performance, but obviously it does a lot on the emission penalties too, specifically speaking on the ETS as well as the fuel use factors. I will be speaking on a glimpse on how biofouling affects the same in terms of reducing the expenditure on purchasing the EUA costs or the EUA units, as well as I'll be providing an overall glimpse how does the reduction percentage affects in terms of fuel use penalties too. Just confirm, Ashila, whether my slides are changing.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so just to go forward with the contents, I'll be giving you an introduction on the ETS, what is ETS and the scopes and tapered allowance of it, the impact on the underwater cleaning phase 1, where I'll be taking on the live data, which we have simulated for a vessel for the month in account of April. After which we will be seeing how does that percentage after underwater cleaning impacts a reduction on the EUA purchase cost, as well as the glimpse on the fuel U, how does it impact. To start with, EU ETS. EU ETS, as we all know, it's man of the hour. EU ETS is being extended, has been extended to the maritime sector from January 2024, and it's a market-based approach by European Union, which gives you basically the owners and the operators a right to emit certain amount of emissions. So whatever amount of emissions you are emitting, you have to purchase that amount of allowances in terms of EU allowance units. Besides that, the derogations are specific to what we consider it from an MRV point of view. The port of calls as well as the voyage considerations are quite similar, keeping some part different, to be very precise, on the transshipment ports for container vessels, as well as for the outermost regions, voyages which are going to the outermost regions to EEA under the EEA ports are not accountable under the taxation schemes. Right now, EU ETS considers 30 states, 27 EU member states, and 3 EEA states, as well as besides the parameter, like I said, it gives you a right to purchase the amount of emissions that you are going to do, purchase equivalent amount of EUA units. So currently, for the reporting year, of 2025, 40% of the total emissions that you're going to surrender for the reporting period will be accountable under the EUA units. Besides that, for 26, it is going to be 70, as well as we move forward to 27, it will be 100%, with inclusion of other GHG gases, that is namely CH4 and N2O, which we know right now for MRV, it has already been included in the regulation of 2023/957. Besides that, ships of 5,000 gross tonnage and above are applicable, which are trading within the EU EEA member states, and offshore ships which are above 5,000 gross tonnage will be included in this part after post 2026, that is 2027 onwards. The obligations of surrendering is a little bit different. That is, voyages between EU, EEA, and non-EU ports are accountable to 50% of the overall surrendering obligations. Voyages between EEA ports as well as at berth emissions are accountable at 100% of surrendering obligations. Now, let us move into the pressing topic of the hour. That is, how does biofouling impacts the overall penalties or the overall expenditure that is going to be accountable, that the owners are going to be accountable, or the operators, or anyone who is, even for the charterers, they're going to be accountable for. Now, biofouling as a factor, like my fellow panelists have already mentioned, it's a pressing impact. It increases the hydrodynamic drag, whereby increasing your fuel consumptions, as well as increasing your overall GHG emissions. Besides that, now to consider in terms of practical terms, how it impacts, we will see through a live example. Basically, in this simulation, to be very precise, I have considered a vessel, oil tanker, weather which is up to Beaufort 5, sea state 4. The fuel type considered is MGO. EUA cost per unit for the month in account of April, since it's a particular voyage, it has been considered of 68.45 euros. Besides that, the category of voyages between EU, that is the 100% surrendering obligations, and the roughness that has been considered in this case is between 150 to 300 microns. It has been seen that light to moderate slime formation had already been there in the hull, and due to that, we wanted to simulate based on that. To start with, there are two periods. Period 1, as you can see from the screen, is basically the period after UWC or after underwater cleaning, and period 2 is before underwater cleaning, So obviously there is a variable change in the graphs, variable change in the main engine consumption as compared to the speeds, varying speeds for the constant power. How does it impact? I'll come into the graph afterwards. I'll just need to get into the data part right now. So to start with, for the same power, as you can see in the table, for the same amount of power previously, before considering UWC, the speed achieved is 10.8 knots, whereby after UWC or underwater cleaning, at the same power, you're achieving a much higher speed. So it creates two scenarios. The first scenario is basically reducing the time coverage of ending a voyage period, whereby reducing your fuel consumptions and your GHG emissions. Besides that, if you want to keep the speed at the same term, the power will be reduced considerably, and obviously that will also impact on your overall fuel consumptions reduction. Below in this table, for the varying speed for a period of 11 days, we could see that there is impact or change of almost close to 1.5 metric tons for speed of 8 to 11 knots. Besides, after 11 knots, there was a constant decrease of 0.9 or 1 metric ton. Now, the EUA cost consideration in this case scenario is 68.45, which I already have said, because it's an 11-day period of the voyage. Per day, the savings was close to around 132 euros. How does it impact? Well, it impacts here. For a period of 11 days, the owner is saving at close to 1,200 euros. If we see from a larger scale, the percentage reduction in terms of the expenditure done to purchase those amount of EUA units is 7%. Now, this is again just for a period of 11 days considered for a vessel under the tapered allowance of 40%. If you consider for a heavier slime, the results will be a little bit different. But just to highlight, 7% is on an average, which you can expect if you have close to 150 to 300 microns on the hull. And based on the same, you can say expect this amount of savings on the expenditure that you're going to do in terms of purchasing the EUA units. Coming on to the next phase is basically the projections. The projections, to be very precise, is on terms of how the GHG emissions going to look like post 2027, because there will be 100% surrendering accountability. Besides the same, there will be inclusion of two new gases, CH4 as well as N2O, based on the same, considering AR5, to be very precise with the regulation of 2023/957, we could see that even after considering the data for a period of 11 days for this voyage, projected for year 2027 plus, there is considerable amount of benefits, almost close to 5 metric ton of savings on GHG emissions per day for a speed of 8 to 11 knots, to be very precise. But there is considerable or reasonable amount of savings. I wouldn't say a massive amount of savings, but obviously a reasonable amount of savings could be seen based on, even if we are surrendering of 100% emissions and including both the new gases based on the same. Now, fuel U, start with, it's a very, I wouldn't say it's a regulatory directive so far. It's obviously a new scheme by the European Union, but it is, I would say, one of the most interesting phenomenon that has happened in the shipping industry, with inclusion of different definitions, even in terms of well to wake as well as for compliance pooling. It's a part of Fit for 55 package. Fuel U regulation is applicable for vessels above 5,000 gross tonnage trading within the EU. And previously, for EU ETS, it was the calculations for penalties were very simple. In terms of EUA units also, you just have to purchase how much amount of units you are going to emit. But here, the talk is all about the GHG intensity, as well as previously you were considering the factors based on propulsion only, that is tank to wake. But now the consideration is from well to wake, that is from production till propulsion. So obviously there will be a higher increment in the terms of emission factors. As the emission factor increases, does not matter whatever your fuel consumption is, overall GHG emissions will increase, so far as to say. Based on the same, since in fuel U, the calculations for penalties is a little bit different. The inclusion depends on the compliance balance. Basically, a compliance balance deficit is a measure on how much penalty you are going to be charged with a fixed cost of 2,400 euros. Based on the same, we could see that there is a reasonable amount of benefit of close to 500 euros, because again, fuel U, we talk about annual average emissions. So extended for this 11-day period, it was extended for an annual average emissions, and we could see an overall benefit of 500 euros in terms of the penalty. It is not a massive decrease in the terms of penalty, but obviously there's a reasonable amount of benefit you can expect. Coming down to penalties under ETS, if the shipping companies register less amount of emissions than what they're accounted for, they will be fined with 100 euros for each of the tons of CO2 that is not accounted. Conversely, they will also have to purchase those shortfall of EUA units from the secondary market at that time period, whatever the cost of EUAs come into the picture. At the end, coming to the end of my slide, to the conclusion, I would just like to highlight few of the points. Average reduction percentage, as I have already said, it's seen close to for a period of 11 days is 7%. Now, percentage of reduction, as I've already said, it is dependent on the amount of slime formation on the hull that has happened. If the slime formation is a little bit higher side, obviously you can expect a higher amount of 9 to 11% of reduction or reduction on the expenditure based on the penalties that you are going. Obviously, it also depends on the weather criteria. I have already considered before 5 sea state 4, but in case of very rough weathers, things can go for a toss. Besides the same, percentage is right now 40, after which 2027 it will be, after 2026 it will be 70, as well as 100 after 27. So obviously this will also impact the overall study that is going on right now, but the overall reduction percentage will be close to 7 to 9 or 9 to 11% depending on your slime formations. Projection as shown is for one single vessel, but for a fleet, if we consider, the significant amount of savings are quite higher. Conversely, if I have to conclude, biofouling is obviously a significant pressing factor or a primary issue that we have to address in terms of savings, or in terms of performance, or ever in terms of GHG emissions. It also has, with inclusion of different regulatory perspective like ETS, like fuel U, like CARB. With this, it becomes much more difficult, even from the owner side or from the operator side, or even from the charterer side, whoever is paying the penalties, to have a very clear picture that how much amount of penalties they are going to pay if they're shelling out so much amount of money. So it is not the only parameter that you should consider for the savings on the penalties, but yes, it is the primary factor which will give you considerable amount of benefits on the expenditures that you're going to shell out on the EUAs as well as for fuel U penalties. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Jeet. That was well said. Like you ended on the note saying the regulations, they do make a change, they do make a difference. And with that, I think Nish is having a stage to explain more about it. This will be talking about the risk assessment, the regulation side of the things. Nish, over to you.
Sheila.
Hi.
So let me share my screen. Right, Ashila, can you see my screen?
I don't think I can.
What about others?
Not yet. Not yet.
Can you see now?
I don't think we can.
No.
Let me go back.
Yeah.
In case this doesn't work, Ashla, you have his presentation which you can share and he can talk.
Sure. Just 1 second.
In case the last attempt doesn't work. Nish, you're going to that present and then slides and into your computer. You're selecting the file, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think something's coming. Yeah, it's come. Me too.
Can you see it now?
We
No.
could see the screen, but we can't see the presentation.
Maybe you shared the screen so you can open the presentation in your computer, in your screen.
Yeah. That is being ready to start.
Ashla, you want to share?
Sir, I'm checking out his presentation. 1 second.
Yeah.
Is it sharing now?
No, not yet. 1 second. Oceanix, Nish.
Sir, I have it.
Yeah, please share. Share
Yeah,
your
sure.
screen. And Nish will prompt you to for the change.
Yeah, sure. I hope it is visible.
It's coming. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, thank you for asking me to come to this fruitful webinar. Actually, I'm talking about basically and mainly in the legal framework, existing legal framework, and the regulations part. Biofouling as a vector for the transfer of invasive aquatic species by ships and related legal framework given by the International Maritime Organization as well as other regulatory bodies. So, shall we go on to the next one? The introduction, under the introduction, the biofouling is known as the accumulation of microorganisms, plants, algae, and small animals on specially wet surfaces, that is under the water surface, basically in the hull and niche areas. Next slides, please. For the hull fouling is mainly was identified mainly by ballast water initially, and then they have identified this hull fouling is the transfer of invasive species, especially by the hull fouling, not from the ballast water. It was initially recognized as from ballast water. We have already discussed about the impact on ecological impact by introduction of invasive species to the new environment, and also the economic impact, that is to the infrastructures, especially clogging of the inlets, water inlets, and some other spaces where water is taking in to the vessels, and also the fisheries sector. So we'll talk about the health sector, health impact, spreading of pathogens, accumulation of toxic, and all. So this is the rising threat of shipborne invasive species because of 80% of the world trade done by the ships. Because of this huge transportation, the increased of threat by the invasive species are at the moment very high. Go on, Ashla. So non-indigenous species and invasive aquatic species, when you talk about under this topic, ocean, many places of the ocean have types of plants, fish, algae, and microorganisms to that particular areas. Especially these species are either intentionally or unintentionally transported to one location to other location because of the humans' activities. So this adoption of non-indigenous species will threat to the balance of that particular places, and the impact to the particular areas biodiversity is actually high at the moment. We'll go on. This is couple of number of invasive species I have taken from the IMO website. The Asian paddle crab. This is native from the Northwest Pacific, China, Japan, Korea area, but now we can see it is in New Zealand. So actually, this carries white spot syndrome viruses affect to the crustacean infrastructure, mariculture, and affect to the biodiversity. And also, next one, I have taken just 3 or 4 examples. This colonial tunicate, the native to Northwest Pacific. Now you can see Northeast, Northwest Atlantic, and even New Zealand. So this is actually aggressive invader where it's invaded to the particular area and damage to the ecological balance. Next one. And this is the most Asian green mussel, native to the Persian Gulf, Philippines, and Asian agents. But at the moment, so that has been transported to Caribbean, South Atlantic, and South Pacific. So this rate and wide fluctuation of salinity and temperature that can be grown most of the places in the world. That is one of the threat by the invasive species. So this is the factors influencing biofouling on ships, especially. We will discuss in a future slide. Design and construction, as our experts explain. So design, can you go back, Shila? So design of sea chest and bow thrusters in hull. So operating like ship speed and time underway or mooring time and trading routes and visited place. Those are the main factors influencing biofouling on ships. Right. As explained earlier, so identified as a key pathway for the transfer of invasive aquatic species. So this is, as I told you, this will be damage to the infrastructures and also the ecological ecosystem balance. Okay. Right. Now we are coming to the interesting part, the existing legal framework and the regulations part. This is what I actually mainly focus on my presentation. The race was actually issued long back in 2006 by IMO, and they have come together, and they actually in 2006 they made some initial discussions to have guidelines to minimize the transfer of invasive species. Then 2007 they have given the task during the MEPC, that is during the MEPC committee, bulk liquid and gases, to develop the guidelines. Then 2011 is the one of the turning point. So that was the biofiling guidelines was finalized, and the Marine Environment Protection Committee in 2011. That's it. The 2011 is the turning point to have these guidelines. We'll go on for the next slide. Right. So IMO is the main focus point to prepare and disseminate these guidelines. In 2012, they have given a circular, MEPC circular 792, to minimize the transfer of invasive aquatic species as biofouling, especially for the hull fouling. For recreational craft, they have identified the recreational craft also one of the major vector to transfer of this invasive species. 2013, this guidance evaluating this 2011 guidelines been revisited, and again they have issued a circular, MEPC circular 811, and then the latest one is 2023 guidelines at the moment. That is the very comprehensive and detailed guidelines, resolution MEPC 370/80, adopted in 7th July, and especially in management of ships biofouling through management plans and management record books. And we'll talk about in future slides. We'll go on to the next slide. This is the regulatory measures comes from MEPC 662, and what I have all the way discussed 2011 to 2023. So basically, so this regulations measures is aimed to reduce biofouling risks for all types of ships, including the recreational craft. Let's go to the next slide. During the MEPC 72, that is 72 sessions, they have reviewed 2011 guidelines, and they have identified the risk, biofouling risk, and the risk recognition, and also they have given in the next in the 2023 guidelines the objectives, management practices, and also focus on ship design, especially anti-fouling system with regular inspection. That is under the management plan and the record book. We will talk in the future slides. And then inspection and cleaning. Right. So go back, please. Right. Next one. Then this is the most important guidelines we will be discussing in the further slides. Will we go to the next one, please? The 2023 guidelines, adopted in 27th of July 23. So it has, if you go to the guidelines, if you go to the MAPC circular, so it has introduction having so many things under the instruction. Then the objectives of this particular circular. Then the design and construction, how to design the business and to identify the niche areas. And anti-fouling system and installation and maintenance guidelines are in next page. And then choosing of anti-fouling system, installing anti-fouling system, and also they have identified contingency plans. So then the inspections areas and inspection intervals. Then under the inspection conditions, they need to have the condition of anti-fouling system time to time. Say now, in case of a brand new ship, that's the next dry docking will be 7.5 after 7.5 years. And if it is existing ship, you have done inward survey, that will be after 5 years instead of 2.5 years. So then the cleaning and maintenance procedures and proactive cleaning. Then biofouling management plan. This is the most important thing, but they have introduced during these 23 guidelines. And biofouling record book. And the training and education. The problem is this is actually not the mandatory one. This is actually voluntary compliances. So we will go to the next slide, Ashila. Right. Apart from this voluntary compliance, and as I said, biofouling management system is not the mandatory one, but this is a voluntary. Apart from that, there is a regulatory framework for minimizing invasive species trading off and ballast water management convention, which was already in place 2004, and anti-fouling convention. This too has to be implemented and complied with all the ships and all the ship owners, operators. And even though the biofouling system is voluntary, so go on for that one. So, and this is the one interesting thing, energy efficiency management system. So, this has been implemented a couple of years back. And as one of our experts said, so this biofouling management system enhance the hydrodynamic performance of the vessel and also energy efficiency and the emissions control, like Mr. Jeet said. When you are going into the European Union, you have to have 100% trading of carbons, and you have to take this carbon trading system. And the same guidelines as another regulation method, the same ship emergency management plan has to be carried on board to control the energy and monitor the energy efficiency. That you have to have all the low fuel intake and also the consumption to be uploaded. If you go to the EU MRV plans has to be maintained. If you go to the, even if it doesn't go to the Europe, you have to maintain the IMO DCS management plan as per the requirement. Right, go on for the next one. So design and construction is consideration to minimize biofouling. During the construction, now they have given the guidelines to avoid small niche areas, especially sheltered areas. They are the places vulnerable to get this coalescing of or considering of these barnacles and other biofouling invasive systems. And then, the town places bevel corners, gratings, and protrusions has to be monitored and cleaned during the inspections and the maintenance. Especially the block areas of maintenance has to be cleared. So you will be able to, or the cleaners or the management or the ship owners, to approach these particular areas for cleaning. And also, so you have to have a system of optimizing of seawater cooling system. And because most of the places, especially the seawater cooling system, is clogged by the biofouling. And also, that is a place where the invasive system is transported from one place to another place. Let's go to the next one. And under the MEPs, under the new guidelines 2023, so the contingency plans has been identified. Develop ship-specific plans based on monitored biofouling parameters. This plan has to be ship-specific. And monitoring and the response in the action plans. So you have to monitor hull fuel performance for signs of increased biofouling risks. That means, as Mr. Jeet said, so you have to check your fuel consumptions and known reports and calculate the reduction of or high consumption of the fuel and the speed. Then you will be able to monitor whether you have been or your vessel has been had the biofouling or clogged with some other barnacles or this species.
Nish, you'll have to conclude fast because we may not have time for questions.
Right. Okay. So we'll go for the next one. So this is the inspection. So competent person has to be used for the inspection, and you have to have a fixed schedule for inspection. And then inspection frequency, initially it is 12 months after anti-fouling system being insulated. And then every 12 to 18 months to ensure AFS effectiveness has to be monitored. And then inward inspections, and also during inspection, so you have to calculate the rate biofouling severity. Right, we'll go for the next. Right, so in the cleaning and maintenance, you have to have proactive cleaning, reactive cleaning methods, environmental consideration, and also regulatory compliance. Especially you have to make the document and reporting system. Especially you have to concern about the local regulations when you are cleaning the systems. Okay, we'll go for the next one, Achara. So this identify of risks will be on next figure 2. That is the guidelines. So this is next one. So right, we'll go to the next one. Right, this is the areas, the niche areas they have identified where so biofouling can be happen in frequent manner. The rudder post, anodes, propellers, intake and outflow openings, sea chest, internal seaport system, dry docking support place strips, and beach keel and bow thrust and all. This is the places where the vulnerable area, niche areas for biofouling. Right. Okay, we'll go for this next one, Mishra. So apart from the regulatory framework I explained, we have some other framework, legal framework, Convention of Biological Diversity, UNP Regional Seas Conventions, Barcelona Convention for Protection for the Mediterranean Sea Against Pollution, Asia Pacific Economic Forum, Secretariat for the Pacific Region Environment Program, International Convention on the Control of Harmful Anti-Fouling Systems. This is other legal framework for regulating of migrating of this invasive species. We'll go for next one. So biofouling management plan is one of the important one, has to be maintained on board. Next one. In the management plans, you have to have a responsible person and details of the anti-fouling system, operating conditions, and the monitoring of biofouling risk, cleaning regime, inspection schedule, reactive cleaning procedures, and contingency planning. This has to be recorded in management plans. Next one. Right, biofouling record book. Apart from the management plans, on board you have to voluntarily compliance with biofouling record book. This is recommended to carry each and every vessel. Actually, even though it is a voluntary, especially when you go to the European ports, so the USA waters, you have to have this biofouling record book. Therefore, it's recommended each and every vessel when you're trading Europe and when you're trading to USA waters to have this record book. Okay, next one. So, benefit of managing biofouling, so improve energy efficiency. Then environment benefits, we decrease emission for air, pollution and greenhouse gases. Then cost savings for efficiency, minimize fuel, maintenance cost, extended dry docking, and enhance operational performances. Also, regulatory compliance, like regulation, ensure compliance with environment regulations and enhance the company regulations, and this will give the reputations to the company. Next one. Shall I next one? Shall we go to the? We have only 2 more slides.
Okay, Anish, can you conclude?
Yeah, this is the next one, is the reference one, and thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know there's little.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to the question answers from the audience. Before that, I'm very intrigued by one of the comment from Christer, and I would like to ask that comment as a question to Jeet. Like Christer mentioned that from that LR survey, I mean, about 60% of the ship owners do not, or they are underestimating the effect of fouling, and considering the fact that for a ship owner, 50 to 60% cost is fuel, and that's mostly due to this fouling, the increase in fuel consumption. Why do you think the ship owners might be unaware? Why do you think, Jeet? Do you have any comment on that?
Okay, yeah. I believe, to be very precise in terms of that, biofouling as a factor, it doesn't have, if we even see from a larger perspective, even from performance point of view, it does not have a very high significant impact when it clicks in terms of ESDs or in terms of rotor sales or in terms of any technological retrofits which you can see overall, which is much more readily available in terms of that. This is a factor which obviously has very initial or very internal reductions on the, or internal defects on the performance, for which you have to go into the nitty-gritties on the hull, and you have to understand what's the whole idea about it, how the frictional resistance occurs in terms of that. So I believe that, and also there is another challenge in terms of this is that the considerable amount of money spent in order to do that. Besides that, there are far more, there is an understanding, I don't know why it is there, but obviously it is there still, that, going forward, there are other retrofitting technologies which you can use rather than just going for biofouling, which will obviously give you a more significant benefit rather than just going for a specific a primary solution. But that is not the factor, even if we, like I showed in my slide, that is not the factor when we even consider it from a penalties point of view. I think that will be my comment.
Interesting. Yeah. So Christopher, I just want to ask one more thing to you regarding this ISO 1930, since Jotun was involved in the pioneering effort for coming up with this. So in your opinion, what improvements can be done to ISO 1930, and are you working to submit this to IMO as, or some other ISO version is coming up? You can throw some insight.
I think one of the main, let's call it drawbacks with ISO 19030 is that it's a relative scale. And the industry and all the trade elements which come into play now in terms of quotas and so on, they're absolute. So there needs to come an amendment and an improvement for this framework to allow an absolute assessment of also both the effect but also the changes in terms of the emissions and the efficiency of any vessels operating globally. So I think still ISO 19030 remains a very relevant platform to measure, but it needs to be coupled to a way to create this value into something which says something about the absolute energy consumption of the vessel over time.
Okay. And Jeet, one part was typically we discussed between all of us on the importance of biofouling and how we can mitigate this. But when we look at, you mentioned coating is one side and then there is energy saving devices. So how does ship owner or operator make a choice among the various energy saving devices and solutions? And within a particular choice, let's say within a coating supplier, how do you then decide what kind of coating or which supplier? How do you do that assessment from a ship owner side?
So, even getting too much on the on the nitty gritties of it, I'll just provide you an overall understanding, which I believe it should be there. It's because even with inclusion of fueling, with inclusion of new regulatory perspectives, it becomes very easy to comment on this fact that switch over to biofuel or switch over to ESDs are far more easier or far more on a I would say insightful thing to do, or since it gives you a greater amount of savings in terms of percentage on the penalties. But as I say always, that sustainability goals, that your goals should be sustainable, but not at the behest of making your business non-profitable. So obviously you should make some informed decisions, like switch over on the biofuel cannot happen easily, or ESDs retrofitting cannot happen easily unless and until when you consider the availability of the same as well as the cost, the capex on the same. If that weighs a little bit above on the penalties that you're going to surrender at the end of your reporting year to the European Commission, well, yes, then you can take an informed decision based on that. But if it does not do it, obviously there are primary concerns, primary solutions, like you can get a good paint, biocide-free paint, anti-fouling paints, which can obviously somewhere you have to start, somewhere you have to see that amount of savings. And 9 to 11% of savings is not bad when you consider it for a whole fleet.
Yeah, understood. Okay, so we have a question to Nish actually. I think you mentioned about some of these biofouling management measures and others are voluntary. So in this, even like why should the ship owners and operators comply? So even if they are voluntary, and so do you?
Yeah, start to answer your questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Sandith. And now there is a compliance call, clean notation. Most of the classes are issuing clean notation for the ships, and this is not the mandatory one at the moment. If you are going to Europe, most of the Europe countries asking for clean notation. So we know that the oil water separate at the moment is 15 ppm. But in the clean notation, when you have the clean notation, you have to have a 5 ppm, 5 parts per million. Same way, when you have to, why we need to have a clean notation? Because you will get the business you have, especially when you go to the European waters. Like as I said, EUMRE plan has to be complied with on board. So when to get this clean notation and to have your business as operator, as the owner, So you have to have this particular biofouling management plan. And also, as Mr. Dit said, if you go to the European waters, and if you are going from China to Europe, for 50% of this area, the emission carbons has to be purchased from by the operator. And if you go to the European waters, you have to have 100% purchased, and that's why we have to either it is not mandatory, we have to have a voluntary compliance. Even we are sending all the informations to EU MRV and to the IMO DCS, and then they have end of the year they have how much of carbon we have emitted from this particular vessel. So that's why we, a vessel owner or the ship operator, needs to comply these regulations, especially the biomanagement plan and biomanagement record book. As you know, before the ballast water management come into the force, so we as captain and operators, we had to comply with voluntary compliance for the ballast water management before it comes to the regulatory operation. So that was the reason. I think I have given the answer. So you are
Sandith, sir, your mic is on mute.
Sorry, yeah. So the next question to Christian. That is, apart from decarbonization benefits, which aspects of clean hull would have the most immediate and impactful effect for the ship owners and operators?
And luckily, it's been reiterated by several of the other presentations as well. The key benefits, of course, decarbonization is the most looked upon and sought after benefit in general, because that's a defined and clear target. But in addition to that, it's biosecurity. So basically protecting biodiversity, as was also touched upon quite in detail here. Since the industry is estimated to be responsible for about 70% of all bioinvasions in the marine environment, it's also an absolute need to focus on this. And some market, as was highlighted, also refuses to allow vessels to call their ports unless it's confirmed to be clean from biofouling on their hulls. And as we're moving into new fuel types, it will be ever more important to reduce the consumption of those fuels, because they will be more energy intensive to produce and they will be more expensive to use. So the industry is absolutely reliant on preserving and reducing their fuel consumption as much as possible to allow them to be both having as low consumption as possible and at the same time being as economically sustainable as possible in this situation.
Okay. All right. So we have another question to Jeet. This is, will there be changes to charter party agreements in accordance with vessel underperformance, and how will it affect penalty obligations?
Okay, that's a good one. Actually, these are the situations which we have faced very recently in recent times. Previously, for example, from a owner's side and from a charterer's side, there's a mutual understanding. Even if the vessel is for during the idle period, and the vessel is for idle period for 3 weeks, the charges will be taken up by the owners. But what happens if the vessel underperforms after those 3 weeks, and the charterer has to take that vessel off hire to get the vessel at par with the so that the speed is at par with the performance, and the vessel does not underperform, for which the charterers will again be liable to pay to the owners. Now the problem that happens is, for the 3 weeks the accountability is from the owner's side, but after that the accountability comes directly onto the charterer. Now, even if they go for off-hire, as we know that under the BIMCO clauses, the charterers are not paying, or they are not liable to pay for the off-hire period under the EUAs. So technically, there is a dilemma that goes on between the owner and the charterer, that who will pay for that time period if the vessel goes off-hire under underperformance. There can be underperformance claims even for that. So there should be some mutual understanding or some amendments to the charter party agreements which could highlight the idle time period, how it will be taken care of.
Okay. All right. So this question is in light of how the many of the industries are moving into a SaaS model, right? I mean, like software as service, like even coating as a service model. So this is to Krister, like why is Jotun as a paint supplier also including other technologies such as robotics and digital tools to provide clean hulls to the industry?
And I think actually you chose a very good analogy to describe it, because in the end of the day, it's not about only the paint in the can, but it's about the performance that the vessel is achieving by using a specific solution. And during our close to 100 years experience in these types of market, we also see that there is a host of different um, um, needs. There are so many different trades, so many different vessel types, and so many different operational patterns that require a variety of different solutions in terms of technology and products altogether. So what we see is that with the increasing need for performance, with the increasing regulatory constraints that we see in the industry, we also need to apply more tools to have a toolbox to enable our customers to achieve their targets. One thing is the coating as a foundation, but then using, for example, digital tools to monitor, manage risk, and also report on the performance, helping customers with advice in terms of anchorage and other parameters, and also using robotics, both in terms of inspection, but also for proactive cleaning, allows in totality the market to achieve a higher degree of clean hulls than we would if we were only continuing to focus unilaterally on coatings.
Okay, yeah. So, Nish, you mentioned that some of these voluntary regulations will ultimately lead to mandatory one, maybe starting in some location, eventually the whole world. So, just to take upon, there is a similar question on how does a biofouling management plan, what you mentioned, help minimize biofouling and protect the environment? And what is the current legal framework? I think you touched on already, but maybe you may want to elaborate.
Thank you. And before that, I just want to add something to the charter party one. When we are doing the charter party, because I was, doing the charter parties in my career, what we're doing is when we're doing the charter party clauses, we are having a rider clause. Say if it is more than 21 days, there is a clause to clean the hull, or underwater cleaning has to be taken care by the charterer. So that is the initial agreement. Then the underperformed claims cases will be sorted out at that particular period where we need for the cleaning of hull is under the terms of the charterer, because vessel is idling because of the charterer's case, even though if it is under the charter party type. Okay, right. Then the question, the biofouling management plan. Actually, BMFP, biofouling management plan, helps to reduce biofouling. So especially it says inspection and maintenance. So regular checks has to be done and upkeep hull, especially in the niche areas. So the proactive and reactive cleaning has to be scheduled, especially in emergency cleaning, even measures and manage of biofouling levels. So the use of anti-fouling systems, especially the coating thickness has to be decided by the ship owner or the operator. If it is a vessel under bareboat charter, for years, if the dry docking is undertaken by the bareboat charter, the coating has to be decided whether 5 years or 75 years, according to the required level of regulations. Then this BMFP, the management plan, will helps to protect the environment, especially minimize spread of invasive species, and that will reduce the transporting of invasive species, and also, as discussed, lower the fuel consumption. And also BMFP helps to keep the comprehensive record keeping for future references. If the website control inspector comes on board, so we have actually keep all the records for his inspection. That means we have complied with the system. The BMFE plan or the record books has to be keep. It's recommended to keep the lifespan with the lifespan of the ship until the vessel goes to the scrapyard. The existing legal framework, even though I said it is voluntary, but as I said, ballast water management system 2004 convention has been already implemented, and each and every vessel has to be compliant with ballast water record book, and also the treatment plant has to be installed on board. When you are coming from A to B, you are loading from one port to discharging from one port, and you have to use a ballast water treating system. That is a mandatory one. Then the anti-fouling system, as I initially explained. So the anti-fouling certificate has to be issued by a class or by the class, or issued by the producer or the paint producer, and to be kept on board till next dry docking. And the other one is what I want to tell something. I think Mr. Jotun director can explain something. There is a chemical, so we have to evade from 2024 1st of January. That is, paint has to be changed, and we will not be able to. That is
Tin-based anti-fouling or something?
Cyberfree, no? Cyberfree paint has to be elevated, so we will not be able to use anymore in future. That is the one of the regulatory things come from regulatory bodies at the moment. I think I have.
Yeah, thank you. So, before I go to the next question for Christel, I just want to take on a number you mentioned, which is you had specified about 10.4 million ton carbon emission in 2023, what you helped your client achieve. So when you say that, is it mostly contributed by the high grade paints what you have offered, and that is in comparison with the normal expected for a paint, which you said it could be 20-25% falling into 5 years? Is that how you have assessed the number?
That is correct. So it's relative to an average benchmark. So what we're doing is that we're looking at the, let's call it the top range of our product assortment, and considering the actual measured speed loss, as you showed also in the ISO 19030, and we're comparing those data points to the average, what is considered the market average, and which is also confirmed by our own findings with actual measurements. So these are the calculations then, which is made fleet-wide with the use of our products, basically.
Okay, so the question from the audience is like, what does Jotun do to understand and enhance the performance of hull through coating and new technologies?
And this is let's call it a more complex but also more wide technology question, because it was mentioned here earlier the use of hydrodynamics as a key point to understand better how things work, and also what I mentioned in terms of going from the relative measurement methodology in ISO 19030 over to an absolute measurement. We're also spending quite a lot of effort and scientific resource in understanding what is the actual hydrodynamic properties of various surfaces and coatings. So we're, for example, using tools in-house and a flow channel, which is able to replicate the turbulent conditions on the hull surface, where we can then measure the actual friction of various surfaces. And then by using CFD, we can scale that up and actually mimic a sailing vessel to understand how different surfaces, different effects, even different levels of fouling will influence the the total performance of a vessel. That allows us in turn to then speed up development of new technology, because we don't need to do all the ISO 19030 measurements before we can actually confirm the speed loss performance of a given technology, but we can do that very much more quickly by utilizing modern hydrodynamic tools to allow us to enhance on that.
Okay. All right. So we have the next question to Jeet, which is, will switch over to biofuel or retrofitting be a better solution rather than going forward with underwater cleaning? I think you already mentioned a bit in your presentation.
I have already touched base on this question, but just to give you a highlight again, it's guys, it's all about the sole point. Make your goals sustainable, but don't make the business non-profitable. So you have to understand, you have to make an informed decision that biofuels, the availability of the same, whether it is at par with the conventional fuels. Obviously, I'm not against switchovers. Switchover will happen, but you have to understand there are large operators, there are small operators. That's what makes our maritime industry so big. So you have to understand the capex, in terms of the retrofitting or in terms of the availability, because the energy density even for a biofuel is much lesser than terms of conventional fuel. So going from point A to B, whatever you will carry, whatever metric ton of HFO you will carry, like for example, X metric ton. So for biofuel, it will be X plus Y. It will be a little bit higher because the energy density is a little bit lesser on terms of the conventional fuel. Now you have to weigh down the fuel EU as well as the ETS penalty costs, whether they match up with the investment that you are doing with the biofuels. If it does not, then obviously you have primary solutions to go with. Attach it, retrofit it. There are compliance pooling. There are factors by which you can obviously save a lot, but you got to start somewhere. And I feel biofouling is a phenomenon which you can address at the granular scale to start somewhere, and then you can jump into switchovers or retrofitting. So far as to say, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I think we are towards the end of this session. So one last question, and then we'll then follow with a minute of summary from each of you before we close. The question is not mentioned to whom, but it is talking of technology for painting. So I guess it must be Crystal. So the question is stating that the biomimicry is not being used, but in reality there must be. It is already in use. So it is like, why biomimicry approaches are not used on a high to reduce fouling. You may want to tell how these are being used and what are the plans maybe on biomimicry, like hydrophobic film, etc. Maybe you may want to tell that. Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that we're still at, let's call it the infancy of actually being able to introduce and implement the use of biomimicry as a real tool for biofouling prevention. For hundreds of years, the go-to solution has been to use biocides, which either deters or acts as a poison to the organisms that want to settle on the surface. Whereas now technology is becoming at a mature stage where there are other alternatives which allow for the use of alternative tools. You may look at solutions which is shown in the market, such as super hydrophobicity, similar to the lotus effects. You may look at like it's slimy surfaces, as you would see on dolphins and whales and so on. So there are various aspects which are in the infancy of now being tried, but the industry and the technology has not yet come to a scale where it's feasible to introduce it, and as Jeet said, also where it's commercially viable to actually introduce it, because some things are absolutely showing an effect, but cost-wise it's not a real opportunity for us to actually bring that to the market at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, so there was one more question in LinkedIn before we close. This is referring to legal battle between charterer and ship owner regarding who is liable for the penalty and the claim due to port stay and fouling on the anchorage. Without going elaborately into the case itself, I just want to understand whether paint or coating companies would support the ship owner in some way in such a case of legal scenario. I mean, in terms of so there's a guaranteeing on performance. Sometimes certain coatings are guaranteed for long port stay, certain things are for short port stay. So, and then there is a claim between charterer and owner. So, in that sense, you may want to put on the screen the case description. Ashila. Yeah, this is the.
I believe we can't share the entire
Yeah, it's a
one.
long story. But
That's
yeah.
a very long one.
Yeah. The point was whether coating companies do support ship owners when there is a dispute with charterers on the coating performance in some way.
I can comment on a general basis and maybe not on this question in particular, but basically we are in continuous and close dialogue with most of our customers and also the indirect customers as such. And especially important is it to make sure that when a product is specified for use, it's understood what will be the usage scenario, what will be the operational pattern of that specific vessel to avoid coming into such situations. And when we see cases where things like this happen, we do include our experts to evaluate and assess the situation to understand what is the root cause and also understand how we can help to mitigate and prevent that issue. So we do see ourselves as a part of that discussion and as a support to all the involved parties in such a case.
Okay.
Well, let me answer for these questions as well. So even though the vessel has been applied with anti-fouling system newly, so though all of the ships have they have a degree of biofouling, even though even recently painted and all. So in that particular case, with the charter and the owner, so unless the vessel is bareboat charter, either by voyage charter or either by time charter, the owner is liable for anything happened by the hull or whatever, even accidents and all. But unless if you have a rider clause in your charter party, the charter is liable for biofouling and any other things, then the charter is liable unless you have agreed in the charter party. Otherwise, the owner is the person who is liable for that, because each and every vessel is liable to, even though it is recently cleaned and recently painted. That's a liability. That's a probability and degree of biofouling. So I understand.
Thank you. So yeah, we come to the end of Q&A session. So before we close the session, so we can have a quick 1 minute summary from each of you. So we may start on the reverse order, maybe Nish first, then Jeet and Krister. Yeah, is that okay? So Nish, you can go ahead with the last 1 minute summary on the key insight you want people to take from you in this session.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, I was talking about the regulatory framework to prevent the transporting of invasive species, and the IMO has taken steps since 2006 to 2011, and finally in 2023 on 76th session of MEPC. Now there's a 23 guidelines to minimize the transporting of invasive species, including implementation and introducing of management plan, biofouling management plan, and also the biofouling management record book. This is the major things they have introduced, and I think this is the basic recap of on my
Okay, thank you. Jeet, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So what I spoke about is mostly the concerning situations right now with owners, operators, and even with the charterers, how to deal with this new regulatory directives as well as with emission penalties. Obviously, we understand, from being at the forefront that there is a lot of confusion, even the regulations which are not clear. So it is, again, somewhere you got to start, somewhere you got to have the primary solution to start somewhere. You have to start the savings. Unless you started, you cannot comment that whether a switch over or a retrofit will be a better solution in order to save on those penalties. So I believe somewhere, if you are starting, then biofouling management is a place where you are getting that savings of 9 to 11% on your expenditure. That is just for a tanker. Obviously, it's the most polluted, and there, if you are getting so much of expenditure reductions, so you can expect what you can get for a whole fleet for other vessels too. So by this, I would just like to conclude that emissions regulations and directives are, again, they are forthcoming. They are forthcoming. There's going to be a lot of changes also in the future, a lot of more derogation, more stringent laws, even with IMO coming up with the green mechanism schemes. But here, a lot of, the only way to go forward within this industry is a lot of collaborations and the sharing of data, as well as so that we know that how and by what matters we can help the owners or the operators or the charterers in what ways, so that it will be beneficial for all the sides. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Krister.
Yes, so I spent quite a bit of time on focusing on sustainability, and especially the importance of a clean hull. We need to make sure that the industry understands how important it is to maintain the clean hull, as that is the enabler of every other aspect of the ambitions that we have. A clean hull assures that we can decarbonize the industry. It allows us to protect biodiversity, and it allows the owners and operators also to preserve fuel and minimize fuel cost. For us in Jotun, one of the key elements is to work together on a wide range of different technologies to help both understand and develop these types of solutions and apply them better into the industry to reach our common target. So we're very engaged in discussing the relevance and the importance of a clean hull, and I would be happy to continue discussions with you guys. So please feel free also to reach out on LinkedIn to find me there, and then continue the discussions offline. Thank you very much for having me here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So we heard about the quantification of the importance of fouling in terms of percentages, like 20 to 40% corrosion from Krister. And when we talk of the relative performance, which is like all about ISO and its impact. And Jeet also mentioned, related to EU ETS, what the absolute performance is related to. And so these two type, what we covered is relative and absolute, is what is all about the hull performance. And hopefully I have laid a basic framework. And we look forward to more such sessions where we can detail out things about the whole vessel performance in the other aspects as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sandith sir, for asking such great questions to everybody. Thanks, Krista. Thanks, Nish. Thanks, Jeet. Thanks, everybody. I think it's time to wind up the section. I'll make this a recorded section. Like I'll be publishing this in our sites, in our social medias, so you guys can access it later on. So everybody, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Jeet. Have a nice day.